The title of this series of lectures, as I indicated, is the House of Learning lecture series. It's taken from the Doctrine and Covenants, section 88, verse 119, where the Lord instructs the saints to prepare every needful thing, even a house of learning. And because the library houses the literature of all the academic disciplines and scholarship in the university, the library can be considered to be BYU's House of Learning. And as we begin this lecture today, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Julene Butler. She is the university librarian at BYU. She received a BA in English and a Master's of Library Science from Brigham Young University. She took a sabbatical and attended Rutgers University from 1988 to 1990, and also from 1993 to 1994. From that university, she received a PhD in Communication, Information, and Library Science. She joined the faculty here at the library in 1971 as a French language cataloger. From 1971 until now, she has held the positions of cataloger, General Reference Librarian, General Reference Department Chair, Library Use Instruction Coordinator, Assistant University Librarian for Public Services, and Associate University Librarian, and now the University Librarian. It's my privilege to work with Julene in the library administration offices, and I sincerely appreciate her work ethic and her leadership. Julene's address to us today is entitled, "The Way We Were, 50 Years at the BYU Library." Something like that. Doesn't say that on that screen. With her lecture, we officially open the exhibition on level 3, on the main floor of the library, that bears the title, "Room D to Harold B. Lee, Celebrating BYU's Libraries." This exhibition is actually a series of 7 different exhibitions that we will be excited to view throughout 2011. We thank Sean McMurray for his work on that exhibition. After Julene's lecture to us, there will be a question and answer period, and after that, we will go into the special collections area for a reception, and at that time, you can interact with Julene, ask her some more questions, have some refreshments, and mingle together as we go into the special collections area after the lecture. And now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Julene Butler as she addresses us about the history of the library.
Okay, the mic is working, I can tell. How wonderful to look out at your faces. See my family right there in the middle, dear friends, dear library friends. I told someone that it's easier to talk to old faces than young faces, so thank you, friends from the past, for coming today. On a bright spring day in 1968, my mother and I drove to Provo. I had been accepted as a BYU transfer student. I was really concerned about housing and the logistics of getting around campus. I remember as Mom and I sat in an office in the administration building, visiting with the woman assigned to counsel disabled students. She sensed my anxiety and pointed across the quad. She said, "Look, there's a girl in a chair, just going up the ramp into the library. You'll be fine." I didn't have any idea that day that the library was only 7 years old. This building was only 7 years old. That fall, I did come to BYU. I was a studious English major who was much more comfortable with books than with people, so I spent more time in the library than with my roommates. You see my roommates there. 3 years later, in September 1971, I started my first job as a cataloger in this Harold B. Lee library. If you do the math, you'll realize that this library has been part of my life for 43 of the 50 years that we're celebrating today. I hope that gives me a few credentials to share some thoughts with you. What I want to do today is share a glimpse of how we once did library work. Originally I thought of doing a deep scholarly historical presentation, but my personal recollections kept coming to the top, and so that's what we've got here. First, I'll give a brief summary of the library's history, focusing primarily on the years since '61 when we moved into this building. Then I want to reflect on the way we were, describing how library programs have changed over time. I think my personal recollections will speak for themselves about how far we have come during the last 50 years. I want to start with a quick description of BYU's earliest years. This photo of Center Street in downtown Provo, that's downtown Provo, okay? It shows the Lewis Building, which was the early home of Brigham Young Academy. In 1875, Carl G. Mazer, who was the first principal of the academy, donated his personal book collection to the school. He stored the books in a closet in his office inside this building. In January 1884, unfortunately, a fire completely destroyed the building and about 2/3 of the collection was lost. One of the heroes of the night was Brigham Young's son-in-law, O.C. Card. Brother Card ran into the burning building that night to rescue as many books as he could. By the way, when you go up to visit the exhibit on level 3 that Scott just mentioned, you will find a curious bracelet. It's a bracelet made of human hair. My nieces and nephews here, you're going to want to see that. This bracelet belonged to Zina Young Card, who was Brigham's daughter and O.C. Card's wife. I encourage you to visit the exhibit now, as well as through coming months as the exhibits change. It will be a very, very interesting opportunity. In 1892, the library moved to the Education Building. This majestic building on University Avenue is what most of us envision when we think of the early academy. Students climbed the stairs to the top floor of this building and went into room D, where they could study and use library books. And as Brother Harrison just told me, they could also use dinosaur bones in that room. After 33 years, the library was so large that books filled not only the top floor, but also spilled into most of the rest of the Education Building. In October 1925, librarians moved 40,000 books and 35,000 pamphlets up to Temple Hill into the new Grant Building. By 1951, there were 170,000 volumes in the Grant Library. A faculty committee that had been appointed by University President Ernest Wilkinson recommended constructing a new building that would be dedicated strictly to library use. The committee's report said, "Planning the future development of the BYU Library is in effect planning the destiny of the entire university program. It is a serious trust, not to be undertaken by the lazy, the weak, the timid, or the myopic cynic, who cannot dream dreams and see visions." Within 7 years, the library grew from 170,000 to 300,000 volumes. The Grant Library could not hold all of them, so 1/3 had to be stored in 7 buildings around campus. Once a day, student workers retrieved books from the storage areas, and students could then check them out at the circulation desk in the Grant Library. In August 1959, groundbreaking ceremonies were held for a new library that would be built in the center of campus, this library. Plans called for a building large enough to hold 1 million volumes and seat 2,500 students. Lockers for graduate students, faculty studies, and a typing room on each of the 5 floors were bonuses that everybody eagerly anticipated. So, 50 years ago, during the summer of 1961, library employees and personnel from physical plant moved 20,000 volumes a day. It took them a little over 1 month, 31 working days to be exact, to bring all those materials from around campus and consolidate them in the new J. Reuben Clark Library, as it was known then. In the fall of 1961, librarians met in the newly completed library, and President Wilkinson challenged them to make the most of the opportunity you have to enrich the lives of the students. Help them love learning. Help them continue to learn always and to respect knowledge. Who knows what good may come tomorrow from the opportunity you extend to some boy or girl today. Everyone expected the Grant Library to last for 20 years, but only 8 years later, Robert Downs, who was Dean of Libraries from the University of Illinois, conducted an in-depth study of the library and concluded that a major addition to the present BYU library building should be undertaken without delay. He recommended that current space actually be doubled. In October 1971, the library celebrated its 1 millionth volume. In only 10 years, the collection had grown from 300,000 to 1 million volumes. I clearly remember that day in 1971 as we celebrated this event. I had worked here for just about 2 months, not quite. So I was in awe as I looked around the Special Collections reading room on the 4th floor, as I saw all the dignitaries. In this photo, you can see Library Director Don Nelson, University President Dallin Oaks, and Librarian Dean Larson, whom I'll speak about in more depth in a moment. They're holding the millionth volume, which is a wonderful book about the Polish astronomer Johannes Hevelius and his 17th century catalog of stars. This is still in our special collections and is a great treat to look through. In October 1974, only 3 years after cataloging our millionth book, we began construction on an addition on the south side of the building. By summer of 1976, when we moved in, not only did we have twice as much space for collections, but we had also nearly doubled student study space and the library's behind-the-scenes technical processing units. The name of the library had changed a few years earlier when the law school was built. So in March 1977, when the South Addition was completed, the new Harold B. Lee Library was dedicated. Sister Lee seemed touched by this honor when she celebrated with us at the dedication. I remember sitting on the lawn south of the library, hearing Don Nelson, who was then the director, introduce University President Dallin H. Oaks as President Hoax. We laughed. We really laughed. Even President Oaks laughed. And then I watched as they sealed the cornerstone. Inside the cornerstone was a time capsule where they put a list of students who had donated to the addition, a slide rule, Don, a tape recorder with instructions on how to use it. They added Gifford Nielsen's football jersey and a measuring cup, since the U.S. would soon be converting to the metric system. As the years went by, undergraduate enrollment increased. The number of course offerings grew, and new graduate programs were added. Faculty were asked to become more deeply engaged in research and scholarship. In order to support all these programs, library budgets grew, and the pace of acquisitions expanded even more rapidly. As the 405,000 square foot library reached capacity, we started replacing study tables with shelving wherever possible. Eventually, though, even with all that new shelving, we didn't have room for new books and journals as they were cataloged. In 1987, when we had to store older periodicals in a vacant grocery store, the picture on the top left, okay, north of this old Albertsons building, north of the stadium. In 1987, then, when we were storing materials there, discussions began with the university administration about the need for yet another addition to the library. Randy Olson spearheaded planning efforts, and by 1995, plans were drawn for an underground addition to be built north of the existing building. Just before final approvals were granted, however, Library Director Sterling Albrecht, and Sterling, it's so wonderful to have you here today, Sterling was asked to address the following questions. Why does the library need more space for books? Won't electronic publication mean less and less print material? Doesn't that mean that you can manage with a smaller edition than you've requested? We spent months preparing answers to those questions, and of course that delayed the approval process. And so when construction began, even more material was in storage and service was suffering dramatically. But in 1996, the first shovelful of dirt was removed and the north addition was finally on its way. For almost 3 years, the gigantic hole in the center of campus forced us to take long detours and spend so much extra time moving from building to building. But it also meant there was endless entertainment. Every time we walked by, we watched trucks moving dirt and workers pouring concrete. It was really fascinating to watch. Finally, in November 2000, the underground addition was complete. The central and south wings were fully remodeled, and all of our shelving, furniture, books, and computers were in place. Our new 21st century library was finally ready for service. On dedication day, the building was evacuated for a final walkthrough by President Hinckley and other dignitaries. Before security forced me to leave, I lingered in the building as long as I could. I remember going through the silent, sparkling spaces, admiring each new desk, and pausing to reminisce over remodeled offices that had by then been home to me for almost 30 years. During those few moments, as I went through the empty library, I was deeply touched. There was a sense of sacredness that reminded me of how I feel in the temple. Well, with that far too brief overview, I would now like to focus on 3 themes that I believe demonstrate how dramatically the Harold B. Lee Library has changed during the last 50 years. First, I'll talk about building library collections, then discuss how technologies have helped us organize library materials, and finally, how we serve our library patrons. First, library collections. This chart reflects the growth of BYU's library collections between 1875 and 2010. It is a remarkable reflection of how our acquisition rate grew relatively slowly until the early 60s and then leapt forward. It also clearly illustrates the tremendous level of support the library has received through the years from university administration and the Board of Trustees. Few libraries receive the level of support that we do. I find it particularly interesting to note here the dates when we reached major milestones. 1 million volumes, 2 million, 3 million, and we expect to add our 4 millionth volume within the next month or 2. It is impossible to discuss the history of BYU library collections without mentioning Dean Larson. And Dean's wife, Jean, is here with us today, and we're so grateful for that. Dean became directly responsible for library collection development in 1961, the same year we moved into this building. He had been involved in acquisitions, but he accepted a leadership position at that point in time. Under his leadership, library collections grew from 300,000 volumes, as we've mentioned, to 3,250,000. This is a 1,084% increase. And all this happened in only 32 years. It's really very remarkable what Dean accomplished. Dean was able to achieve all this through his determination, his close collaboration with university faculty, and his deep friendships with antiquarian book dealers from around the world. Douglas Tobler, a retired history professor, said, "We faculty soon realized that Dean's goals were the same as ours. We all respected him profoundly." Another name synonymous with BYU collections is Chad Flake. In 1957, Chad became curator of a very small special collections. Over time, we acquired the finest collection of rare manuscripts and early print publications in the Intermountain West, and one of the best Mormon collections in existence. An antiquarian book dealer once wrote to Chad saying, "I'm tired of all the great books going to the East Coast and the West Coast. We need some in the middle." We are extremely fortunate that Chad and Dean worked tirelessly to bring those great books to BYU during the years they did. To illustrate how we could never build such a collection today, let me share a few numbers. In 1967, we paid $150,000 for 275 rare books that had been printed before 1501, incunabula they're called. Today, just one of those books, the Nuremberg Chronicles, is appraised at $150,000. And a few years ago, the full collection was worth $2,750,000. We owe so much to Dean and Chad for the work they did during the years when it was possible to build this magnificent collection. None of us who were privileged to sit at Chad's feet when he showed his rare books will ever forget how he loved them. They were almost like his children. Some people, though, were appalled when he would lick his fingers before turning the pages of a 13th century manuscript or a book printed in the 1500s. But Chad knew which treasures could tolerate that kind of treatment. A major trend in libraries over time has been the shift from independent local collections to shared cooperative programs that stretch a library's collection far beyond its walls. The Interlibrary Loan program at BYU grew measurably from the 80s on. ILL became especially active among libraries in Utah and at other church-sponsored libraries. In more recent years, there has also been increased emphasis on cooperative purchasing programs, particularly with electronic publications. Libraries regularly partner to license databases or jointly purchase subscriptions to high-cost journals. Since 1979, when Sterling Albrecht became director, the Lee Library has played an active role in national consortia where academic research libraries develop significant cooperative programs. During Sterling's 23 years as director, he not only sat on the board of the Research Libraries Group, but ultimately served as chair of its board of governors. Under his leadership, the Lee Library collaborated with libraries at Stanford, Princeton, Yale, NYU, and many others to pilot and then mainstream programs that improved operational efficiencies. His efforts also helped influence technology-based library ventures. That takes us to my second theme, which is the impact of technology. 50 years ago, the most advanced tool in the library was an electric eraser. Catalogers, you remember these? But through the years, everything in the library has ultimately been affected by deep technologies. Today, I want to specifically mention how technology affected circulation and cataloging. The first library service affected by automation was checking out books. I remember as a student carrying stacks of books to the circulation desk where I picked up one form for each book that I wanted to check out. I wrote down all the details about each book on its separate form, then gave the books and cards to the clerk at the desk who stamped the due date and handed me my books. Later, another clerk took the copy of the form they kept at the desk and punched a notch over the number representing the book's due date. So you see that one of those holes has been punched out. He then filed the cards in call number order in the drawers that spiraled out from the tall pillar behind the circulation desk. The high-tech part happened each morning when student clerks went through every single file, taking a bunch of cards and inserting a long needle through the hole of the number that represented yesterday's date. Then they shook the cards vigorously, and any card with a notch cut in it would fall out. Clerks moved on to the next bunch of cards and repeated the process, and when they had finished, all the cards that dropped out were the books that were overdue today. They thought that was really high-tech. It was extremely efficient. But BYU's first truly automated circulation system came in 1978. It was amazing. Every night, it automatically generated a list of overdue books. From that list, it also printed out overdue notices. And the next day, student employees folded those notices, put them into envelopes, and sent them on their way through U.S. mail. We saved a lot of time, and we ended up hiring fewer student employees since we no longer needed anyone to shake the cards every day. The deepest impact of technology, though, came with online catalogs and databases. On the national scene, efforts began in the 60s to find ways to make catalog information readable by computers. The Library of Congress developed MARC, Machine Readable Cataloging. This system standardized the way we describe publications and eventually made it possible to create sophisticated commands like we use today as we search electronic databases. You ready for another little walk down memory lane? Let me describe how we updated the card catalog back in the 70s when I was a cataloger. We had no computers, but we did have the National Union Catalog. This is the Mansell portion of NUC. NUC was a set of hundreds of huge green books. Inside were copies of printed catalog cards for 13 million items published before 1956. For years, this was the authoritative list of early published books. When we received a new book, we would look in NUC, hoping to find a catalog record that matched. If we were lucky, we photocopied that section of the page. Then we would literally cut with scissors and paste with tape the photocopy to a standard catalog card. Professional catalogers compared all the information to ensure the card matched the book. They used an electric eraser, like we just saw, to change whatever needed to be changed on those cards, and then added the appropriate call number and subject headings. They didn't type those in. They developed them and wrote them on some, not worksheets. There were no worksheets. There were little slips. Somebody will have to tell me what those were called. They had a name. Okay, later, a group of cards, a bunch of those cards were taped together. And we sent this master copy off to BYU Press, where they made multiple copies, cut the cards to size, and punched a hole in each one. These are already punched because we were using cards. But in those days, it came out on plain old cardstock. That hole, of course, allowed us to safely file these cards in the catalog drawers. Back at the library, when the cards came back to the library, someone typed the book's title at the top of one of the cards using black lowercase letters. They switched to the red ribbon on the typewriter to type in subject headings in all caps. Then the cards were alphabetized, and a young staff member would file them above the rod in the catalog. A more experienced worker followed behind to drop the cards after she'd made sure that all the filing rules had been properly followed. Can you imagine how much time all of that took? What a process. Think of the contrast between all those steps and the way it's done now. Typing information into many different fields in a database and hitting enter, like John is doing here, saves so many tedious steps. While we're talking about technology, I must mention Randy Olson. Randy led the library into the digital realm. In his first job, he typed catalog cards for books written in German. But by the time Randy stepped down as university librarian just last year, he had become the driving force behind the library's involvement in the digital world. Under his vision and direction, we implemented new programs such as consolidated searching and digital preservation, and we established processes for scanning historical photographs, pioneer diaries, and many other rare documents from our collections. Today, we boast millions of digital collections, and statistics show very heavy use from far and near. Finally, I want to cover one more theme, the area that I spent most of my career involved in, and that is serving our library patrons. The architecture of this library has had a long-term positive impact on patron service. When the building was designed, someone, I'd like to know who, someone decided to make it different than most libraries where one central reference desk serves everyone. Instead, we offered reference service at multiple subject desks. Each desk is located near the book collections that support related disciplines and is staffed by librarians who specialize in those disciplines. We still benefit from that early design decision. And in fact, just yesterday in Administrative Council, we received a report from the reference coordinating committee saying, yes, we do need to keep the desks we have now, and that subject-based reference work is beneficial. In fact, studies consistently show that our patrons rate Lee Library Reference Service at extremely high levels. In a 2005 study, BYU received the highest reference scores ever recorded in any large academic library. People today find it hard to believe that when I used to work a 2 or 3 hour shift at the desk, I would leave totally exhausted. I worked non-stop during those hours to help the never-ending line of students waiting at the desk. I would put the phone on hold while I answered the second line, only to hear someone from the church library asking us to verify 3 C.S. Lewis quotes for Elder Maxwell's General Conference talk. And they needed it in 2 hours. We ran back and forth from the card catalog to find call numbers, since the person on the phone could not do a search from home. We trekked into the reference stacks to find an almanac or a gazetteer or a bibliography that we knew would answer our question. Let's see, I think it's a red book on the second row from the bottom, and it's in the middle of the shelf. And then when we got there, we remembered that we had shifted the collection last week, and we had no idea where to find that book. Couldn't remember its title. We knew it was red and where it was, but one day a patron came to the desk and said, I remember watching a film in Navy basic training about a bridge. I think it was somewhere in the Northwest, and anyway, this bridge started vibrating one day, and the vibrations became more and more intense until eventually the whole bridge collapsed. Well, this person wanted to know where this happened, and he hoped to find the film so that he could watch it again. He thought, when I quizzed him for more details, he thought maybe it had happened sometime in the 50s. I took him to the long table where we had the reader's guide set. He sat down, started with the 1945 index, just in case it happened a little before the 50s, and in every volume he looked through all the articles listed under the subject heading, Bridges. After a while, it occurred to me that it might be more efficient for him to search a news digest, so I led him to Facts on File. Again, he started in an index from about 1945 and searched every issue up through the 60s. Eventually, he decided to look further back in time, and bingo. After nearly an hour of searching, he discovered that the Tacoma Narrows Bridge had collapsed in November 1940 because wind caused the bridge to start swaying. Today, all you have to do is go to Google, type bridge vibrations, and in less than a second, you learn not only the date and the place, but you can look right at the pictures and videos of the event. The world has changed. I've left far too little time to say much about library instruction, my favorite library activity. But I do remember the day that 3 students who were taking the tape tour wore trench coats and put paper bags over their heads so that they wouldn't be embarrassed when their friends saw them. And I can still see classes of 25 or 30 students gathered around the card catalog trying to hear what Marv was saying about how to find background information for their English 115 paper. We thought the first computer instruction room back in the corner of level 2 was so sophisticated. Look at those terminals. But we later realized how primitive it really was compared to the rooms that we now have today. 4 of these rooms where each student can sit and do in-depth research and get deep assistance. If you walk over to the south side of level 1 today, you'll see that we are remodeling again. We always seem to be making changes to accommodate the newest service. Level 1 south, that part of the building, where we once had 2 very busy reference desks, you will now find, in that area, you will now find that we're tearing down the ceilings and the ductwork so that we can install more compact shelving that will hold thousands of old print journals and seldom used books. We need to relocate these books from other parts of the library so we'll have more room for students to work together in study groups as they get ready for an exam or prepare a PowerPoint for a group presentation. These lively no-sh or nosh zones, as the students call them, are heavily, heavily used. And in one, we even allow students to eat their celestial sandwiches. Change always brings resistance. It seems we hear complaints no matter what we do. Back in 1974, when students learned that we were planning the South Addition, we thought they would be thrilled. But what we overlooked was that the lawn south of the library was a favorite gathering place for students. One specific tree there was an absolute favorite. It was a tall poplar that provided a lot of shade. Students would say, "I'll meet you at the poplar," or let's study under the tree. When students learned this tree would be removed to make room for the addition, they were outraged. They were not going to let that happen. They threatened that if we went ahead with our plans, they would organize a protest rally at BYU. On the day, President Kimball came for the groundbreaking ceremony. The controversy grew more intense as that day drew nearer. Campus grounds people offered to transplant the tree somewhere else on campus, but that did not appease the students. There are several people in this room today who vividly remember how this controversy ended. I was sitting at my desk in the catalog department one day when I heard a sudden, loud clap of thunder. Richard Jensen, he said he'd be here today. Richard Jensen told me just 2 days ago, on his last day before his retirement, he told me that he was walking down the steps outside the south door of the library when it happened. I heard it, but he saw the action. He said that he saw a bolt of lightning hit that poplar tree, sending bark and limbs flying in every direction. When the dust settled, nothing else had been damaged. No one had been hurt, but the tree was left there with a gaping 12-inch swath down the trunk of the tree. Clearly, it would not survive. We later talked about how someone had helped us out. The students were not listening to us, but they had to accept what he said. And then the tree was demolished the day we broke ground for the addition. I want to close by sharing an experience described by Todd Britch at the library's dedication in November 2000. Dr. Britch was academic vice president at BYU in the 90s. Remember I talked about when the plans were questioned, when we were challenged about whether we really needed a building that large. He said, "During the time of these serious discussions, I was thinking about the challenges we faced when for a brief moment I caught a glimpse of this addition in my mind. I could see a long row of students stretching from south to north, some with laptops, some with books, some reading periodicals, but all were studying in the most wonderful conditions. Immediately I could feel how important this building was to them. I knew that we needed to go ahead with our plans." He then described what happened 3 years later, the day Sterling showed him the not quite complete building. Brother Britch said, "I almost gasped as I looked down the center of the periodicals room. There, in reality, was what I had only imagined. The row of tables, the beautiful wood interior. As a longtime BYU student and faculty member, I've seen BYU expand from the Grant Library to this magnificent facility of my dreams. I believe this great library will be central to fulfilling the clear call given by the prophet leaders who daily work under God's inspiration for this institution. I'm most grateful that for a moment I was able to catch a brief glimpse of the Lord's tender mercies that surround BYU." Since we moved into our library in 1961, the stairs in that original part of the building have been worn down by thousands of students coming and going every day. Today, students wear fashions that are far different from what we wore in the 60s. They come with cell phones attached to their ears. They read the news on an iPad instead of a newspaper. And they hit the delete key on their laptop instead of going through gallons of whiteout at the typewriter. Many still wait until 2 nights before their paper is due to start their research, and they still stay up all night cramming for finals. And thankfully, they are also still the same sincere young people who wear themselves out trying to discover the perfect article, write the perfect paper, and find the perfect soulmate. We have so many stories of students who met their spouse here, who proposed, the proposal happened here. Great stories. These students, our students now, their earnest desires to learn and grow as they prepare for a lifetime of service is both endearing and inspiring. Think back for a moment to what I read a minute ago, what President Wilkinson told BYU librarians 50 years ago. Remember, he said, "Make the most of the opportunity you have to enrich the lives of the students. Who knows what good may come tomorrow from the opportunity you extend to some boy or girl today?" Isn't that challenge just as important now as it was then? Who knows? Maybe 50 years from now, one of the students you helped at the reference desk this morning, or one that you taught in an instruction session yesterday, will be standing here as the university librarian, describing how much the library has changed since 2011. I pay tribute to each of you who has contributed so much to my life, so much of your life, so much of yourself to our library. Each of you has helped it become what it is today. It has been such a privilege to be part of the Lee Library since those days as a young, insecure student when I wondered whether I could manage at BYU. I am grateful for each one who has touched my life in profound ways, and each who has done their utmost to make this library great and help it move toward its destiny. Thank you.